Alright, welcome to part 4 of the Reclaimed Modern Table build. On our last adventure together, we completed the apron and leg assembly for the underside of the table. Today we're going to get started on putting together the top. The 3 strips you see at the center of the screen are going to be the center inlay of the table itself. The outside edges of the tabletop glue-up are going to be these 12-inch by 1¼ inch solid walnut boards. And this is why I love reclaiming, because you don't find boards in this width and thickness in this material for anything less than a fortune, and I got them for free. And with a few shrill twists of the antique board clamp I got at the flea market, first half is glued up and done. So all of this wood that I'm using on this project had years of wax and polish and finish built up on it, so I had to plane down the edges a little bit just to get the glue up to stick right. And sometimes I like to use a glue roller to get the glue nice and spread out on the edge, just to make sure I get a nice good bond among the top boards, because I'm not using biscuits here. Long story short, I put the clamps on it, got nice and tight, nice and flat, glue ups are boring, let's move on. And it's time to cut the ends flush. This table is about 7 feet long, so I built over that mark because I knew I can come back and flush trim the ends with my circular saw. I like using angle steel for this as a guide because it's about the straightest thing I have over this length in my shop. I'll be making breadboard ends out of the sides of the old door frames from the cabinet itself. It's nice because they already have a dado down one edge, so I only have to make it a little bigger and join it to the end of the table. I cut this to size using the miter saw. I have a new blade and I went very slowly because I want a nice clean edge on the end of the board. In the final product, these ends will show, and I really don't want to have to do too much work to them because it's end grain and it's a pain in the butt. And I need to expand that dado, so I mark off the new depth with my combination square, and I chop off this keyhole to save for a very special piece later. Man, that needs some oil. Alright, it's time to shape the new dados. While it's nice to already have a starting reference in the old dados that were already on these pieces, I have to make them a little bit wider and a lot deeper. This process is pretty simple. It just takes a while. After each pass, I moved the fence one blade width towards the other end of the interior of the dado. Just like that. Then you make another pass and you move the fence again. After the final pass, if I'm not yet at the desired depth, I raise the blade and repeat the entire process again. Use the combination square again to double check the depth of the dado, and it looks good.
Cool. That's it.
Now I transfer that measurement, the exact depth of the dado, to the end of the table with a marking knife. And it's router time. No, for real, there's like a lot of routing on this. So in case you're wondering, I'm just using a regular 1/4 inch fluted flat bottom bit, and I'm using my framing square over there as a guide to make sure I don't go past the line I marked earlier, that is the depth of the bottom of the dado. And even though I have the guide there, I still move very carefully along that edge. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm shaping the tenon on the end of the table that will fit into the dado that you just saw me cut in the piece on the table saw. So I did one entire side of the table at half depth, went back and did the entire thing again down to the final depth. Precision is key here because if you screw this up, you might end up having to shorten the table, and that's one less person you can invite to Thanksgiving dinner. After the top surface is done, I flip the table over, measure it up again, and mark where the end of the tenon is going to be this time. And don't worry, I'm not going to make you guys watch me do this 3 more times. We're done here. Just got to check everything again with the combo square and make sure it's nice and straight. Using the router can leave all sorts of marks and bumps here and there, so we just clean those up with a chisel, double check everything again, and we're good to go. So now it's time to measure the holes for the drawbar pegs that will permanently attach this breadboard to the end of the table. I basically eyeballed the location of the peg holes because I wanted them to line up a little bit better with the sections of the tabletop than to be an equal distance apart from each other, because that would look weird. I drilled each hole all the way through both sides of the dado into a backer board. I pressed lightly and was patient and let the tool do most of the work because I really didn't want a blowout on the front or back of this board. You'll see the dado on the breadboard end and the tenon on the table are really a snug fit, and I got to get them on with a rubber mallet. And it has to be nice and tight because there won't be a whole lot of glue applied here. You'll see what I mean in a minute when I say that this is somewhat of a dynamic joint. For each of the peg holes on the end of the table, I shove my pen in and mark the tenon. I'm sorry. To remove it, I hammer it to one side, give myself a little bit of a lip, and use a block of wood so I don't split it or damage the piece with my mallet. Now I'm going to draw bore these pegs, which means that the alignment of the holes, top to bottom, are going to be a little bit off on the tenon than they are on the breadboard end. I'm drilling them ever so slightly closer to the center of the table on the tenon so that when I hammer the pegs through, they will bend and clamp themselves through the hole and draw the breadboard end closer to the center and make a really nice tight bond. You'll also notice I'm rocking the drill as I get further and further out from the center of the table while making these holes. This elongates the holes towards the outside edges of the table, which allows for wood movement laterally along the boards of the tabletop. This allows the pegs to sit firm and flush in the holes on the breadboard, and it's a naturally dynamic joint. It moves a little bit, but not a whole lot over time. For those same reasons, glue is applied only to the top and bottom surface of the center board of this glue up. This joint needs to be strong because it is the end of the table and will receive a lot of pressure from the top and bottom as it gets leaned on and lifted. The vast majority of that strength comes from the tight fit of the joint itself and the drawboard pegs. So I go to insert the drawboard pegs and... disaster.
God damn it.
I'll explain what just happened live.
So a minor bit of tragedy. So what happened was the drawboard pins were a little too out of line with the inside peg holes, and it forced a split here. And I tried to repair, but it wasn't really worth it. It wouldn't work. It forced a split on the bottom of the breadboard, which lodged the pin inside, and I need that to be strong, so it was basically scrap. So I had to break it to get it off. I really can't mess anything else up. So, to have a day's work in the can, I gotta go back and do this all over again. Hooray!
While past me goes back and fixes the idiot mistake that he made, older, wiser, narrator me is going to tell you about these pegs. There is nowhere around here where I can buy specialty hardwood dowels of varying species, and I didn't want to wait for them to come from an online store, so I made myself a quick jig. I'll link the video for it here, but it takes about 5 minutes to make the jig, and it's very simple. So if you ever need hardwood dowels to match whatever project you're doing, check that out. Here we are, back at the glue up with the new breadboard end. And I wasn't kidding before when I said I really just don't have a lot of this walnut left, so I cannot screw this up again. So this board still has the old worn edge at the end. It's a little rounded at the cuts, but as you can see, it's still a nice tight fit by all the mallet work I've got to do. The only other place that glue is used in this assembly is right at the top of the breadboard pegs. We want them attached permanently to the breadboard, but not the tenon below where the holes are elongated. We only glue the entirety of the center peg because it doesn't move anywhere. I use my crosscut saw to cut these pegs flush. Any minor scratches or dings in the surface are going to be planed and sanded away in a few moments, but I also use this piece of cardstock to prevent any really deep gouges from forming. While the glue is still tacky, I hit it with my random orbit sander over the peg holes. The fine dust will mix with the glue and fill in any holes that might not be visible to the naked eye, but will show up after it's finished. Then as a block plane to flush everything up nice, I use a block plane because I'm going over the end grain of those pegs. And I belt sand and later palm sand up through the grits to remove all the old antique finish and polish and wax from the piece. And we are done with the tabletop. I am so pleased at how this came out. It looks gorgeous. If you want to catch the rest of the series and any other work I might post, hit that subscribe button. It's over there next to that weird little puddle of drool you got going on. Later, makers.